October 31st meeting of the City of Santa Barbara Historic Landmarks Commission. Anyone from the public wishing to address the commission on an item not on the agenda may come forth at this time. Seeing none, I'll close public comment. Moving on to the approval of the minutes of the Landmarks Commission meeting of October 17th.
So moved.
Second.
House Arias. Are there any comments or corrections?
Yes, there are, Mr. Chair.
Mr. House.
On page 7, this is the continuation of item 5. Under the motion, comment B, that should be pilasters instead of plasters at the end of that sentence with an I, P-I-L.
But are they plaster pilasters?
They might be.
They are plasters.
Yeah, and then on page 7, item 6, ex parte communication is the wrong term there. I don't know what it should say, but it doesn't involve an outside party, just that he watched the recording. And
That's true.
page 8, continuation of that same item 6. Under the motion, comment 1 maybe should say, on the entry doors, add pigment to the clear coat. And page 9, item 7, under the motion, comment number 2, should that be break up the glazing in the main entry of the hotel?
Yes.
Okay. And number 7, precedence should be the ENTS version of precedence. And comment 8, should that be, well, let's see, I seem to remember those were not drawn accurately, the grills. They were just kind of lines. So bring up suggests raise the grills, but what was the intent there?
I don't know. I wasn't here.
I know. Anthony, do you remember?
I'm sorry, I don't actually have that in front of me.
Oh.
My form didn't come. I looked at it
Okay,
online.
it was the hotel at 433 East Cabrillo Boulevard, and one of the comments was bring up the grills on A202. And I remember there were some small little grills that he apologized had not been fully rendered or something. But I can't imagine what was said that got interpreted as bring up grills. We could just leave it alone. It's not that constant.
It was. If I remember right, it was in the side that was the train track side, and I thought, if I'm thinking of the right one, it was there were grills that maybe needed to be raised more.
Yeah,
I don't think it was my comment, but I was just recording.
Yeah. Let's just leave it alone. It's not of that much consequence. Item 9 at the end, other element on the tower in lieu of a chimney.
Yeah, that was right.
And I am not sure what item 12 means. Study the thickness of the gate building entry court on A212. Was it the thickness of some specific element? And what is the gate building? Was it the gatehouse building?
Gate building entry court. Gate building entry court?
I don't remember a gate building. I'm sorry.
There's that detached building on to the right side of the entry driveway. I'm wondering if it had something to do with that. I know we had some discussion about that. But
Mr. Chair, you could ask the staff to review
yeah, you could review the tape on that.
the tape.
Yeah. Comment 13, should that be make sure awning height isn't too low or high? I think. And
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's a really clear direction, guys.
yeah.
Make sure awning height isn't too low or too high.
No, you know,
There was-
what does that mean? what does it?
I can
This
tell you.
project comes back in a year.
Yeah.
And what does that mean?
So some awnings were
The awnings
Yes.
should be at a standard height, and it needs to be
Well, it depended on the design, because some awning designs were the like the spears coming out, which could be lower if you folded it, and some of them were the awning heights were all over the place, and we didn't want them too low, or didn't want them too high, but we wanted them in some overlap of the opening.
You weren't there, so just pipe
that was a
down now.
Commissioner Mahan
They should be
awning.
adjustable.
Yeah.
I think that because they used multiple different styles of awnings and designs of awnings, there was one comment didn't quite fit all. But some of them they had way above the windows, and some of them they were overlapping way too low below them. And so because there was 5 different awning types that he was using, some of them were too low, some of them were too high, and it depended on the type.
Did you get all that?
The applicant knows.
So just make sure the awnings aren't too low or too high.
Chair.
The awning should be a traditional height relative to the window.
That's a good comment.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, comment 14, I think should be extend entryway to the sidewalk as an additional non-accessible path.
Yes.
And comment 16,
What do you mean by entryway?
I know, I wish we could
There was an
identify
ent-
that better.
there-
There's a secondary
Is
entryway.
that a building? Is it
no.
a gate?
What-
Is it a pathway?
What ordinal corner of the building is that, Anthony? Is
That was the
southeast or something?
southeast. Oh, that was at the corner of Cabrillo and
Salsa Puentes.
Salsa Puentes, yeah.
Yeah, so near the corner, at the building corner near Cabrillo and Salsa Puentes.
So the southeast corner.
Okay. And finally, comment 16, if this isn't changing the motion, it would be nice if it said the limited use of lawn is acceptable.
I think that was the main intent. That it was we were okay with some lawn. Try to use it,
Yes.
carefully,
Yeah.
sparingly, in the right. Yeah, exactly.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, we were supportive some use of lawn, not necessarily everywhere, but that a certain carefully used lawns, and we talked about El Paseo as an example, and that's what they were. I think they wanted backup
Thank
because
you.
of that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Reyes.
I seconded the motion, but I would like to ask the maker of the motion if he would change the motion to read that approval of the minutes with the exception of this project, which the conditions will come back for us to be reviewed further. I think when you've got 16 different versions going on, it's important that, and this is a major project, it's important that it be done right. So I think it should come back for review.
Or
Chair
can-
Lavoy,
Yes.
motions can only be reconsidered if the request for reconsideration is made at that meeting or is made the day after the meeting.
Right.
Okay, let's have staff read the motion back to us, please, as you have it right now. Slowly.
Continue indefinitely with comments. 1, adjust the entry court fountain to be more Spanish and tied to the rest of the fountains and landscape within the hotel. 2, break up the glazing in the main entry of the hotel with a vertical element. 3, study mechanical equipment views. 4, bring off-white samples for curtain colors. 5, restudy plaster shown above the paired columns on the east elevation in either wood or thicker plaster. 6, show columns in a larger size and study for capital relationships and proportions. 7, show precedence for the columns. 8, bring up grills on A202. 9, study a weather vane or some other element on the tower in lieu of a chimney. 10, study the height of the arches on A203 and consider elliptical arches as an option. 11, show the A210 elevation without the trellis. Number 12, we will be reviewing the tape. 13, the awning should be a traditional height relative to the window. 14, extend southeast corner entryway to the sidewalk as additional non-accessible path. 15, the commission supports fountains and small trellises. 16, the limited use of lawn is acceptable.
Mr.
Okay.
Chair?
Wait a minute. Number 3, study the visibility of mechanical equipment.
Yeah.
We wouldn't want the mechanical equipment to have the best view in the house.
It has a good view.
Once they pay for it.
Mr. House.
I see that it was there for project, for PDA, but it just says continue indefinitely. So I don't recall, did we not give it a PDA then?
It couldn't, actually, there was something we couldn't, I thought we couldn't give it, actually, PDA. It was for it, and
It
there
says
was...
action may be taken if.
But if it's not in the motion.
Okay,
and
so it did not get
project-
PDA, so it will be coming back.
Okay, good.
So if it was granted PDA, then you have to make the findings, and they would be noted.
Yeah.
No.
And we just have to remember to insist that it come back in progress after it gets PDA.
Thank you.
On page 4, it probably in public comment, I had asked Ms. Reeling, I believe twice or 3 times, as to what her objections were and why she filed the appeal, and it should correctly say that she filed the appeal because she objected to the staff review of the consent calendar for signs in EPV. And she only had a minor objection to the actual signage. Anything else? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any abstain? Any opposed? The motion carries. No? Good. Our next item, I'm sorry, a consent calendar.
Yes, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, today at consent we had 2 items. Item A, 909 Laguna Street was continued 2 weeks with comments. And item B, 1317 State Street was approved as submitted with conditions to be reviewed by the urban historian. The consent calendar was reviewed by Commissioner Lavoie.
Can I have a motion to ratify the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second?
House, Grumbine, any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Announcements.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Today, Commissioners Drury, Mahan, and Lenvik will be absent. And we also want to announce that the 428 Chapala Street appeal will be November 13th at City Council. So we do need a commissioner present.
What was that project?
Yeah.
It was the structure of merit designation of 428 Chapala, the entirety of the building. It was versus just the wall.
Oh, the cuff, or whatever that restaurant was called.
Casa de Sevilla.
Yeah.
Oh, that again. What date?
Again, it is November 13th, Tuesday, November 13th. It's the day before our next commission meeting at 2. It's on, council starts at 2. I'll let you know what time it's agendized for when the agenda comes out.
Okay, I may be able to.
Okay.
If you can't, I probably can.
Okay, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
That's the second Tuesday of the month, right? I can't make it. No, I can't make it. I have another meeting. So, yeah, Mr.
Okay.
Grumbine, if you could,
Yeah.
please.
I'll just double check, make sure I can.
Any other announcements?
Yeah, I can make it.
Subcommittee reports? We haven't had very many subcommittee meetings.
Not lately.
Lately.
Although things.
Huh?
All the work you gave us at the last one.
You're busy doing, I appreciate that. Miscellaneous action item number 1 is 1500 State Street. The Commissioners request to adopt a resolution of intention to hold a public hearing on November 28th, 2018, to consider the recommendation to the City Council for city landmark designation of the Trinity Episcopal Church located at 1500 State Street. before this begins, I had a prior association, both being on the board and a member of this church. That association ended about 5 years ago. I still have close friends and a very loose association to this community and this building, actually. So, Nicole.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. We're here to set the date for a city landmark hearing to recommend to City Council the designation of the building. It is currently a structure of merit. The hearing is to be set on November 28th, 2018. The building was completed in 1919 with noted architect Philip Hubert Vroman, and the parish hall was designed by architects Sewell Murphy and Hastings, completed in 1926. And as a ashlar cut sandstone building, it is significant for both its historical and architectural influence on the heritage of the city.
I'll open public comment. Is there anyone wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'll close public comment. Commission, any questions? Comments? Could I have a motion, please?
Motion to adopt resolution of intention 2018-14 to hold a public hearing on November 28th, 2018 to consider a recommendation to the City Council for city landmark designation of the Trinity Episcopal Church located at 1500 State Street. So moved.
Second.
House second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstain? Motion carries unanimously.
And we're early and don't have an applicant.
We'll recess for 10 minutes.
We're good.
Stay there. I'll reconvene the meeting. Our next item is an archaeological report for 222 East Cannon Perdido Street. This is a review of an extended Phase 1 archaeological resources investigation prepared by David Stone and Lucas Nicholas, Wood Environmental and Infrastructure, Inc. Staff.
Yes. One, I have an announcement that on the agenda, it did not say that David Stone is the preparer of the report, and I just wanted to make that announcement, as well as that Dr. Glassell reviewed the report and agreed with the conclusions of the report.
Thank you. Mr. Stone.
Good day, David Stone with Wood Environmental and Infrastructure Solutions, and I'm impersonating the not-so-great pumpkin today.
Go ahead.
Mr. Pumpkinhead.
Would you brief us on your report, please?
Well, Chair, I wasn't prepared to do so. It is an extensive report. Its conclusions are that the project site is within the archaeological site CA SBA 133. There's a portion of the Presidio outer defense wall that extends into the southern corner of the project site. There are resources that are mapped on archival sources indicating that there was occupation within the project site in the 19th century. So we can use this. This is great. That this is the project boundary here in a very nice burnt sienna or something like that. And as you pointed out, Chair, this is the existing foundations that were exposed some time ago during a field school, the Trust of Historic Preservation, that extend into the project site. Those are readily observable. Other resources that were identified through an extensive archival map review are this adobe dating from the mid-19th century. There was also indicated through these maps an adobe oven, or an oven used to produce adobe materials here. There was the potential for a bastion extending from the corner of the outer defense wall here, which was sort of like a guardhouse or a place where the Spanish who designed the Presidio intended to place cannon, protective cannon, and that was indicated on maps here. And there were a few other structures dating to the late 19th century and early 20th century in this location over here. So what this extended Phase 1 investigation proposed, and our objective was to excavate a series of trenches that are indicated. Are we good? Yeah, thank you. Through 1, 2, 3, you see these rectangle green squares, and these were excavated by a backhoe operator under the direction of our archaeologists, done very systematically. And for each of these trenches, and tell me if I'm giving you too much information you'd like me to progress. For each of these trench excavations, the amount of soil did not exceed 6 inches at any time. That's called a lift from a trench. And a 5-gallon bucket of soil was screened through a 1/4-inch mesh to determine the presence of any artifactual materials from either the Presidio period or associated with the 19th century adobes, or also the 19th to the 20th century Anglo period of occupation. So what these trenches identified was a light to moderate density of materials associated with, again, the Presidio area as well as the 19th century adobes, and 2 trash pits that were associated with the late 19th century or early 20th century occupations. So the materials that we did recover were in a disturbed context, and the permit research that we did indicated that this parking lot that exists now was first constructed in the 1960s. There is a permit indicating that activity, and what we've determined from the nature of the stratigraphy of the soils we identified in these trenches is that that parking lot activity resulted in a redeposition or redistribution of these soils of a cut and fill. This landform slopes or sloped even more greatly to East Camp Perdido Street originally, and then the topography sloped in this direction prior to the construction of the parking lot. So what we've found is that in our disturbed soils in the stratigraphy, the profiles of these trenches, several of which are illustrated in the report, is that the nature of constructing this parking lot resulted in the elimination, unfortunately, of any evidence of the foundation that, of this adobe, as well as the adobe oven. And we, importantly, as you can see, excavated several trenches in this area where the archival maps had suggested the potential for the bastion foundation. And unfortunately, in any of these, we did not find stratigraphy or cobbles that would suggest that the bastion foundation has existed. So we were disappointed, I suppose, that the stratigraphy of these trenches, these 21 trenches, suggests the parking lot activity, land modifications had completely eliminated the potential for these foundations or historic features to be identified. But we still acknowledge clearly there's a potential for smaller intact areas of deposit to be located within the trenches that we sampled here. And as a result, we are recommending a controlled grading of this portion beginning on the southeastern boundary up to this point, so this area of the project site. The grading be undertaken prior to construction under the guidance of an archaeologist with the requisite experience in this period, the Presidio period, Spanish and Mexican periods in this area. So in the event that we did miss anything, and obviously this is not meant to be an exhaustive analysis, but a characterization of resources, that they can be identified during that controlled grading, and if so, that they could be evaluated properly. The area further north from this point over would also be monitored, but that would be done during construction. And the rationale here is that from this portion over the project site, our archival research did not identify the presence of any structures dating to the 19th century, the Rancho period. But instead, this period, this area of the project site was occupied during the late 19th or 20th centuries. So, in conclusion, we were unsuccessful at identifying any foundations of either Presidio occupation besides the exterior, the outer wall, and we were not successful at identifying 19th century Mexican period remains. We were as successful at identifying 19th and 20th century trash pits. So the site does have limited significance, and the mitigations we're proposing we consider would reduce potential impacts on those unknown resources to less than significant level.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll open public comment. This is about the archaeological report. Mr. Molly, please come forward. Thank you.
I submitted a letter to the effect of what I'm going to say right now, but our main concern here is not the low to moderate density deposit that was evaluated in the 20 of 21 backhoe trenches, but it's the extant foundations, which David pointed out in the southeast corner of the lot. And in fact, there's more than 23 feet of those foundations in the project parcel, and as designed, units 104 through 108 are less than 10 feet away from those foundations.
Yes, sir.
And while one can argue that the low-density, somewhat disturbed context of the archaeological deposit encountered in the backhoe trenches is not significant, the same cannot be said of intact foundations of the original European settlement in Santa Barbara. This feature needs to be evaluated and should be given a respectful buffer from proposed construction. As currently designed, units 104 and 108 and their associated walkways all come within less than 10 feet of this resource. Monitoring is not acceptable. Treatment of known significant archaeological resources, avoidance is. Please provide an adequate buffer for the archaeological remains of Santa Barbara's birthplace.
Before you go, what would you consider an adequate buffer?
I don't know. What would the adequate buffer be if it was a historic structure? Because it is a historic structure. It is an above-ground, extant portion of the Presidio Foundation. Mm-hmm. So it's not just an archaeological remain, it is a structure.
Understood. Thank you. So anyone else wishing to speak on the archaeological report? Okay, I will close public comment to the commission for questions. Mr. Grumpine?
Yes, Chair LaVoy. Yeah, I did have a question. So, and it was very interesting to have seen and known the different drawings of the Presidio, and now to have someone dig for the bastion and see what other. So you had said that this whole site, and maybe I'll use the pointer, but it's been, this portion here has been. This whole portion was graded to go from here to here. Was that you were saying in the 60s? It was the soil was removed here and put here, or
You're on. Oh, you were on.
Commissioner Grumbine, yes, and in addition, this area certainly was filled in. These trenches that we have here show that it was complete fill. This area was the high spot, and we're thinking the fill also was pushed this way, too.
Okay.
So the high spot was here. This was a low spot. This was a low spot.
and are you confident that the amount that you went down in these trenches, if this bastion was, if they had either scraped or filled or did whatever they did in the 60s and before, that for sure if there was a bastion there, you would have found it depth-wise?
Great. Just happened to be prepared for you.
Good.
Maybe and you can arrange,
That's good.
Chair, if we're good. So, in fact, I'm sorry, not so good. Here are these, still good?
Yes, still
Here,
good.
here are the trenches in the area that you were concerned about, and here are the photographs of those trenches. So the trench exposures extended all the way through what's called the A horizon, which is the topsoil, the B horizon, that is the subsoil, until we got to really the basal foundation. So we were very, very concerned about going deep enough in these to get below any potential for cultural, including the foundations here. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Other questions? Comments?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. House?
I only have one. I had to find something to nitpick.
Well done.
Thank you. On page 39, 40, and 41 in the table 1, under the depth column, feet should be changed to inches.
You sure?
For example,
correlating centimeters to the other number that's,
for example,
well, for instance,
Page again.
8
39,
inches is
39.
pretty much correlated to 20 centimeters, not 8 feet.
yes, I see what you're saying. So under trench 1, for example, feet to centimeters, that should be 0 to 8 inches.
Correct. And the same thing happens on the 2 succeeding pages.
Isn't it a nice header? You
It's
can see
very-
at least this
very
is a nice
lovely.
header. Yes.
Graphically.
Understood. Understood.
Got it.
Understood. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Grunbein?
since we're nitpicking, I just want to clarify one more thing.
As long as it's important.
Yeah.
Page.
Don't trivialize
Okay.
what we do.
No, there is one I want to clarify, make sure. So page 13. So besides military duty, the soldiers, I'm going to make sure you're not meaning something else. Besides military duties, the soldiers and their families were responsible for their military duty, maintaining the are you saying their military duty is to maintain the Presidio, or is there?
I'm struggling to catch up with you. Which paragraph?
Paragraph
Commissioner?
during its early years.
Third paragraph.
During its early years, the
Yes.
Presidio's population was relatively small, including soldiers and their families.
Okay.
Besides military duty, the soldiers and their families were responsible for their military duty. Is that military duty of maintaining the Presidio? Mm-hmm. Okay.
But as long as we're being factual, we're responsible,
Yeah.
not responsibility.
See, I didn't go that far.
That's fine. Yes, so the answer is yes, and there's a
That's-
clarification
okay.
that's necessary with that word.
Okay.
Okay? And I can make that change.
And to be clear, this report only evaluates the archaeology and does not make recommendations for the proposed project. Am I correct?
You're absolutely correct in terms of my interpretation of my role. May I make just one
Go
one
ahead.
point? Thank
No,
you.
Please.
Just to be very, very transparent, the site plan that you're looking at in this report has changed slightly from the site plan that you will be discussing in the next item. And as a result, I would anticipate that you would direct me to revise this report to include whichever site design that you are going to be passing judgment upon.
Yes.
That site design that you're seeing actually was initiated subsequent to our findings and as a result of our findings. So
Okay.
that's sort of why you're seeing what you're seeing there.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Grunbein.
along those lines, I did have another question about what is, because this is, usually there's not much that is found on most of the reports that we see. In terms of how the mitigation or how the process works that you were talking about, what is, how does that compare to sort of is this a standard way that you're proposing of addressing a site of this nature in terms of how much? Because just in these various test pits, you found so many objects.
Yeah.
How does what you're proposing compare to sort of a standard or a very extreme version of sort of typical archaeology practice?
It's a very, very good question. It's not a straightforward answer. So the answer I will give you is that there's no hard and fast guideline relative to the spacing of the areas in which you explore. You could call these telephone booths, or they're really not telephone booths this time because they're rectangular. We chose a 30-foot spacing of these, given and particularly making sure that we had enough of these trenches in areas of highest concern. Given that it's an archaeological judgment, and I guess this was verified by Dr. Glashow, that we were adequately characterizing the potential variability of cultural resources that could be found. Now, obviously, if we tried to dig up everything, we would have a 100% certainty, but we'd also cause the damage to the resource before you and the city Planning Commission and Council would have an opportunity to pass judgment on the project. So this spacing is consistent with, for example, the type of spacing I would use in an prehistoric archaeological site. And it's a different situation, but the variability within that site, again, is a lot of refuse that was left by prehistoric populations, similar to this situation. So what I could also tell you is that this treatment is very consistent with other projects that the HLC has, within the recent history, evaluated for resources similar to this one, in particular 218, 222 East De La Guerra Street, which was on the south side. This is on the sort of the southeast side. It was down here, where we also did an extended phase 1 using geoprobes, the 2-inch probes, with the same sort of spacing. So in terms of the treatment, this controlled grading approach is exactly the approach that was recommended and approved on that project, the 218, 222 East De La Guerra. Also for 800 Santa Barbara Street, I'm sure you recall, this is the condition, this is the archaeological condition that is associated with that project, to undertake controlled grading to maximize the opportunity to say stop and to assess whatever needs to be assessed at that time.
So the proposed grading is more or less a mitigated phase 2?
It's a very, very good question. It's mitigation, so that would be technically a phase 3 mitigation. But in the event that materials were identified that we hadn't expected, then the mitigation also includes additional assessments as part of that mitigation. Because it's not a phase 2, Commissioner Lavoie, because we've determined that it is a significant resource already.
Okay.
So we're dealing with that significance,
Okay, good.
if that's
Thank
okay.
you.
Yes.
Good, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Rios.
on page 56, there it talks about additional possible things that may exist below the disturbance depths associated within the urbanization. I want to know if that is being well covered and protected.
Okay, so Commissioner Rios, could you also direct me, I'm sorry, to the specific reference? I know I'll
It's the
find
middle paragraph.
Okay.
And it says that it addresses the adobes. Occupations may exist below the disturbance depths associated with 20th century urbanization and or between the trenches that were spaced approximately 10 to 30 feet apart.
Yes.
In small trash pits from this time were to exist on site, they would potentially have the potential to address the following criteria.
Yes, I'm with you.
I'm glad. That's nice. Now, can you tell me if that's being protected
As we,
in your construction?
well, I'm not going to address construction design because that you'll hear subsequently. The point here is that it is acknowledged that the 21 trenches that we excavated, it does not represent a 100% excavation of the project site. What this is pointing out is that there is certainly the potential below the area that has been disturbed or between trenches that we excavated, the potential for significant resources. So as a result, the mitigation that we're proposing we feel adequately would identify those resources during the control grading, and also then we would apply, or the archaeologist retained at that time would apply standards to recover information to identify those or to adequately document them.
May I continue?
Yes.
Thank you. In this, it talks about spaces of 10 to 30 feet apart. And one of the things that was mentioned was a buffer between the units. I believe 104 was one of them, and
104 to 108.
yeah. Since you were talking about buffers in this case of 10 to 30 feet, do you have any suggestion of what kind of a buffer should be placed in this area for the foundation?
Right, Commissioner Rios. The 10 to 30 feet apart actually referred to the spacing of our exploratory trenches.
That I understand.
Yeah, I do not have a recommendation for that.
I would like to point out to the chair that we have a recommendation of 50 feet for distance from historic locations. And that is not, when it was mentioned at the planning and city council meeting, that this was a buffer that was put in around historic things. And perhaps that is appropriate to put in here.
Commissioner Rios, where was that distance specified? Was it specified in a document or a discussion?
It was specified from a document that we have used, and it was mentioned in the discussion by one of the planning commissioners who wanted to change it, I believe. I think.
I can try and clarify that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
On our city maps program, we mark all the city landmarks and structures of merit, and around the structures of merit is a little 50-foot halo and it's an alert for applicants and staff and designers. You are near a historic resource. It doesn't specify how close you can build or not. That's just our notification boundary that alerts all of us. There's a historic resource close by, especially if new construction's going in. You're going to need to be compatible. Start looking at your guidelines and being alert. So that's and then we have a 100-foot one around buildings on the National Register and landmarks.
So that's a sensitivity zone.
It's called the sensitivity zone on the map. It's so that we so people get some warning and aren't blindsided in their design when they come in. And we're like, whoa, you're next to a historic building, you need to consider it.
Okay. Thank you. I have a question for staff. At what point is a historic site structures report triggered and or a cultural landscape triggered?
There are various points. We trigger them. Sometimes we trigger them before they come to you because their project is a large addition on a historic resource directly on it. Sometimes we do it in concurrent. We agree with the commission. We look at the proposal, and at the first or second hearing, we decide this needs further study. So the cultural landscapes have all been initiated by the commission. Mostly our MEA really addresses site by site.
Okay.
And as
So-
we update that to more current preservation methods, we'll be looking at more context statements or something more
Do you
comprehensive.
request that right now, or 10 minutes from now, or the next meeting?
You can request that at this meeting whenever you're ready. I haven't looked at the project yet, and I have a little site explanation of all the sources around that you can look at and request at that time.
Okay, good, perfect. Thank you so much. A motion to accept the report,
I'll make that motion.
Mr. House. Mr. Van Nier, second. Could you also include that the site design be updated on Figure 13 to the currently proposed site design? And the other changes, minor changes that were noted?
That is
Maker?
acceptable to the maker.
And the seconder? Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstain? Motion carries unanimously, and I'm going to grab that figure out of the document.
I only have one comment.
Yeah.
Boo.
Boo-hoo.
Thank you.
I'd like to have the rest of this paper. Okay.
There's more marks inside. And with a big brown felt tip, too.
Our next item is item number 3, 222 East Canaperdito Street. This is comments only. Planning Commission review is required. This is a concept review new. I could have, you're not going to leave that, huh? Yeah.
No, Mr. Pumpkinhead brought it.
First, before I take these off, my long distance, you have to guess my costume.
Oh.
All in black.
Headless horseman.
Architect.
Oh, architect.
That's what I'm wearing.
Yeah, Morgan wouldn't be all black, though. So that's a modernist. Those are the scariest type.
Yes, I know. That's why I thought I'd wear it to you guys to scare you.
I'm scared.
Please introduce yourselves.
My name is Jeremy. I am the applicant.
Christine Prome with the Cornell Collective Architect.
Welcome.
Trish Allen with Suzanne Elledge Planning and Permitting.
Welcome. So,
I'd be happy to start off.
Did you want me to do the staff report, a quick staff report?
oh,
Staff
yeah,
comments?
do we have drawings?
Yeah, we need.
I just have the staff report, and then I'll put out the drawings, yeah.
Oh, okay, fine. Doesn't want us thumbing through the drawings.
Stay on target. Focus.
I wanted to just really start off with pointing out the historic resources around the site so everybody has a clear idea of the site. So the blue is the site proposed, and the purple are historic landmarks. So this is the Roshan Adobe, and these yellow orange ones are structures of merit. So this is the Presidio Research Center. This is the Moulet House, the Italianate house that's now Panino. And this is the little cottage that was just designated in a structure of merit. And this is the neighborhood house here, which is on the potentials list. And this is the site, this purple site is where we just designated the Ali Kama Theater a city landmark. So those are the resources, and I have some streetscapes just to introduce you to the site. So this is looking up Santa Barbara Street, and here's the Adobe, the Roshan Adobe. So the project site's right behind this. This is another view of the 800 block. Here's the new structure of merit, the little cottage, as well as the Moulet House. And here you are looking from the corner of Santa Barbara Street at the structures of merit and the landmark here. And here's the corner looking down towards the street, and here's the project site will be filled behind this structure of merit. And here's the project site sort of looking up at the structure of merit, the little Italianate building up here. And here's across the street the Presidio Research Center. This was built in 1928 as part of the School of the Arts, designed by Sol Murphy and Hastings, and behind it is the LA Kama Theater. So those are just to really orient you to the site so you can see the sensitivity, and I'll go ahead and pass out the time.
Thank you.
Thanks for your undivided attention.
She knows us too well.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hand it down.
There it is.
Do we have, yeah, another one's coming.
Yeah, that's, okay, good. That's the one we did.
One more?
Oh, yeah, I have these.
Or a little one? Sure.
I'll pass these down. Why don't you start?
Sure.
Go
Thank you.
ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is it on? Yeah.
It's on
All right.
now,
Thank you,
yeah.
Mr. Chair. Sometimes you press it once, it's off. You never know. Anyway, happy Halloween, everybody. It's good to be back here. I wrote this little letter because I'm very proud of this project. This meeting is the culmination of a year-long effort to determine the best use of the property for all stakeholders. We've engaged neighbors, considered the impact of various options, and did considerable archaeological investigation of the site. Preserving the history of Santa Barbara is important. Nothing at all in this proposed project disturbs any archaeological resources. The fact of the matter is that the new building's Spanish-style architecture and landscaped paseo will actually enhance the aesthetic quality of the neighborhood. We must all be mindful of balancing general concerns about development with the urgent need to provide housing in our community. Santa Barbara is undeniably in a housing crisis that is a direct result of not enough homes and apartments being built. This project offers to build 8 homes on vacant land that is currently being used as parking. The size, bulk, and scale of this project are consistent with the development pattern around Santa Barbara State Historic Park and neighborhood. The site currently has a 3-story office building on it. The proposed new buildings will look better and are smaller than what's already there. There are many 3- and 4-story buildings within a 2-block radius of the project site. The Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation has outlined some concerns about the project that I would like to address. First of all, there are foundations of the outer defense wall that run along a small portion of the property line. I brought photos that I can show you in a second. Currently, there are cars parked right up against it. Our proposed project, with a generous setback, is a big improvement over the current reality. We have engaged the trust to try to determine what is an appropriate setback, and we have not gotten any concrete feedback from them. Mr. Chair, you asked them as well, what is an appropriate setback, and they are not prepared to give you an answer, which makes it very difficult to move forward in a constructive, productive way. I would submit to you that the setbacks we've proposed are very reasonable. Because we're a commercial use project, 0 setbacks are required by zoning. We've gone above and beyond what's required. I agree with the trust that maintaining public access to the foundation is important. They own the property on the other side of the property line, on the other side of the foundation. Public access is already something that they can provide the community. And there will be only minimal impact to views with this development. In addition, we engaged the neighbors and got lots of positive feedback, both the Council for Drug and Alcohol Abuse that's down the block and this building right over, well, this building right, these neighbors right over here and some around there. In closing, I urge you to support this project and to help me move it forward. This is a well-thought-out project that is already modest and will make a great addition to the neighborhood while providing much-needed housing. And I'm happy to share with you the photos I've brought as well. And here's a copy of the letter, so you can reference it in the future. Mr. House.
Thank you.
Commissioner Reyes, Commissioner Venga. And we've got some copies for staff as well, so you can keep in the record. So a big deal's been made about these foundations. And so what are the foundations? Where are they? Can you see the foundations? Got a copy for you too. I think it's important to look at these and realize what we're really talking about here.
This is not a good tack to take, young man. We know what's there. We know what the foundations of the Presidio look like. We know what they look like after the adobe's melted into the ground. They're there. They represent the first European settlement of Santa Barbara. They're very important. Their location alone is important, even if there was nothing there. What is the project you're going to present to us, please?
Sure, we'll move right along into presenting the project to you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, thank you. I think you're very familiar with the site, but I'm going to quickly go through these photos as
TV,
well.
can you zoom in on the image, please? Thank you. A little bit that way. Good, thank you.
Here we are looking at the proposed project site. Here is the existing commercial structure beyond, the existing stone walls that you'll see in the sketch. As well here, looking at the site, here's a little more internal, looking at the existing building, the existing structure. Internal to the site, looking back towards Canyon Perdido and the resource center here. Again, internal to the site. There's a back alley associated behind the building. Again. And here is, hard to look upside down, across the street here. And again, looking along Canyon Perdido, the resource center, and down the street from us. I'm going through these quickly because I believe you're all very familiar.
Yeah.
Please stop me if I need to stop. And then I did take a couple more photos that I just wanted to orient you so you could get an idea of looking at the project along Santa Barbara Street. Here's the Roshan Adobe, of course. And here you can see, I took another photo standing a little bit more inboard so you get a sense of how little is seen. There you see the existing commercial structure, and that's stepping into the site. Here's the Roshan, here's the small structure of merit, and then here this is even more eclipsed. You can't even see the commercial building beyond. And then I also just did want to take you over here to De La Guerra, looking back towards the site. You can see a little bit of the peak of the commercial building, and we would be probably eclipsed back here behind the trees. So the site, we were really excited to work with Jeremy on this project, and we're...
Pull it closer so you...
Yeah.
Good.
And so when we initially looked at the site, we're a little bit surprised to see that this is actually priority overlay, and that we could have done up to 22 apartments on this site. And we looked at that for a little bit, but realized very quickly that that was just not going to be an appropriate development for such a sensitive site. So with Jeremy, very early on, we looked at smaller scaled projects that we felt would fit better with the adjacency of the park. And so I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of this condition. So the project itself, as you can see, here is the concept elevation facing Canyon Perdido. And this kind of elevation was done intentionally. I've got one here.
Okay.
Yeah. Was done intentionally to kind of mirror almost the resource center so that we ended up with a nice bracketing experience that we believe, helped define the entrance into the more historic zone of that is so important to Santa Barbara. Let's pull that the whole way back. So, side by side, because it was a little easier to read, was the existing survey and then the proposed. And so you can see here is the parking lot to Panino's. Here is the back side of the Roshan Adobe. The school is located over here. And so we're proposing, instead of a large building, what we decided to do was break down these forms into 3 smaller pieces. So we have a small 3-unit building here that is the one that kind of mirrors in its aspect the resource center across the street. And then another smaller piece of architecture here that wraps the perimeter. And then we've housed a a parking stacker for the benefit of the commercial building in what would be about a 1.5, 2-story building here, and then a small piece of trash. And what we also got excited about in thinking about this project was, creating, there's this beautiful stone wall, and maybe just puncturing a little bit of it, and creating this residential scale paseo that walks around the perimeter. And in that way, we have kind of engaged I think a streetscape that relates to the surroundings. And I think that we felt that that was an approach that had a romantic feel to walk down this kind of stone-clad paseo to these units. I think typically you'd see them accessed from the other side. And I'm going to flip to the elevations, but I did want to point out, because this is part of some of the thinking that happened with both of these buildings, is this elevation here, and you saw that in the photos, about 5 feet higher than the adjacent. So the apparent structure is probably more a 2.5-story, and we show that in the elevations. We also maintained a significant setback along this building in particular. And what we did was, you'll see here's the blue line that's a 5-foot, and then here's the 10-foot setback. You'll see most of the form is back at 10 feet. We have a little bit of entryway architectural expressions that pop out beyond that. But most of these go 10 feet, 13 feet. And one issue I want to kind of clarify is that's to the property line. Here you see this kind of estimated line of the foundation wall, and that is taken from the painted, you're probably familiar with the painted estimated location of the foundation wall. So that was just an extrusion and an understanding of what was happening, what is extant here in this corner. So you can see that we're in fact in this location, and I didn't want to put any dimensions because it isn't an estimated location, but you can see it's 25 feet here easily. It's 15 feet in here. It's only here in this condition that we get to the 10-foot range. So we did feel that this design, it respected that architectural, that archaeological possible element in resource. Sorry. So this is the front building, and as you can see, this is the quicker sketch of that front elevation that you see conceptually on the cover sheet, with a 2-story element at the front, a little kind of stone surrounded gate, and then the 3-story element to step back. And here you can see it. This is has 2 elevations. One is showing the elevation of the building itself, and then the second shows you the height of the adjacent grade, and then here's that chain link fence. So you get this sense of the actual apparent mass seen from the parking lot. And I do want to point out, we did this study, and there is a little bit of a grade change as you go up to the front. We were keeping this consistent roof mass with the expectation that we might step this down. It's 1 foot maybe to walk with that grade. And here's the back elevation, and then facing the parking lot elevation. So the back building, if you noticed in plan, we undulated the wall faces, creating kind of some faceting to the architecture to make it feel a little bit more organic, a little bit more old world village-like. And so you'll see that reflected here a little bit in some of these angles and facets that happen as you walk down this elevation. And again, this is showing the building in the foreground. That's that steel clad shed building. And then these are the little pop-outs that I talked about, that these are just architectural projections that exceed that 10-foot line. And then over here at the corner, and this is the one change we did make from after David Stone's report, is you'll see we did not have any construction happening in that one corner. We did think that we might have an opportunity for expanding some construction when no resources had been found in his report. And if you look at the site plan, you'll see it's now a two-story garage with a little bit of a two-story element here.
Could you show us
Sure.
where that is in the site plan?
This was the variation that we're talking about here. It had been a one-car garage, and it seemed like there might be an opportunity to expand that to a two-car garage with the better understanding of what the resources were possibly in that corner. Here's a quick sketch of the existing building and a sense of what that little trash building might be. And then the parking garage would just be a simple little, I think it's probably almost a two-story building. That would be a simple kind of garage structure here. We didn't develop that particularly. And then again, the same kind of expression here along facing the parking lot. And these guys were access up to roof decks. I think if the commissioner supports this concept, I think this could be lovely little tower elements that kind of peek up above this simple roof line. And the final page are plans, but I did want to take a moment, and we did have an opportunity to do some photo simulations to help better explain the project. I've got 2 extra sets. Can you pass this down? This one, to start, we're standing at about here. I think we're actually a little closer, but we're standing about here. So it's not actually at the public way, but internal to the site, representing how this might look and feel if you're standing internal on that site. That's what it looks like right now. And here it gives an idea of the proposed structure. So you can see that there's still quite a bit of mountain preserved, quite a bit of the Riviera preserved. That what we do, our eclipse, is already covered somewhat by existing structures, and that the piece of mountain does still continue to show up here. We just lose this little portion of the Riviera. And we just sketched that in a little bit closer to the street, standing at the street edge. So I think it's more or less the same condition. And then we also took the opportunity to look at what the experience would be from Canyon Perdido. So here's the existing, and here is the proposed. So here you see the front building, and then the back building. We actually, we had to ghost in those trees. It was so dense you couldn't see the structures at all. But you can get a sense of how it will look and feel. And again, I think the idea of the scale of this building is similar to the resource center. So again, I think it makes a nice bracketing element. And that this building is tucked pretty far back, and there is a lot of opportunity for some pretty dense landscaping around this building as well. Yeah, I think I've covered my points. And I think that I just wanted to, again, make sure it was clear with the commission that we aren't 10 feet, except for the one corner. We are greater, much greater in some places than 10 feet from the possible resource location. That it is just in that one corner where the bastion had thought to be, that we see existing cultural resources, and that we are holding back about 10 feet. And then as that estimated line moves away from us, we get as far as 25 feet, maybe 30. Again, I'm estimating that location, so I don't like saying anything more than that.
Before you wrap up, or you wrapped up, talk to us about the land use agreement that allows you to develop an existing parking lot that is used by another building.
Yes.
Briefly.
Okay. Jeremy, I mean, that's
Yeah,
that is your building.
That would be your call.
Sure. What do you want to know?
It just sort of like this is perhaps the first time we have seen the use of parking that's dedicated to an existing building being developed further.
Sure. Well, yeah,
And-
I'm the sole owner of the property. I own the building. I lease it out to people. We're overparked right now, so we have more parking than what's needed for the commercial building. Okay. We're going to provide parking. Each of these units will have its own dedicated parking garage, and then we're going to build a parking structure that will, along with the additional parking, provide all the parking needs for the office building. And it will all remain on the same lot.
Okay.
And I could clarify a little bit, just the stacker unit, I think perhaps. Is
We've seen them before, yeah.
We've
We've seen them before. We're kind of used to them.
So just quickly, it is providing the office parking, not the residential parking, although there might be some opportunity for evening parking for excess cars in that stacker. And again, because Jeremy owns the project, that would be possibly a good use of that, the stackers. But each of the proposed apartments has its own dedicated parking.
Okay.
And then just to wrap up then, we did speak several times with Ann Peterson and Mike and Molly from the trust, and really appreciated them taking the time, working with us. We learned a lot about the site and learned a lot about some nuances to the project from those discussions. We also had an opportunity to speak with Gordon Cici from the school. I know there's a new headmaster, so I don't know. His only concerns were privacy in that corner, and felt pretty good about the distance we were holding back. But because it's a new headmaster, perhaps we should speak with them again and make sure that they're completely comfortable with the project.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one comment for the commission.
Yes, Nicole.
As you review today, keep in mind we do have the infill guidelines for projects adjacent to historic resources, and this would be the meeting that you all would want to request if you want 3D renderings, if you want story polls, if you want anything you guys need so that you can thoroughly evaluate this. We have the supplemental materials, and this is the meeting to do it. So keep in mind you can request whatever you need.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. I'll open public comment, and this is on the design itself. Mary Louise Days, please. Mary Lou.
You're on.
Followed by Kevin McCary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did not hear the owner's surname. I think for the public record it should be stated. Also, I'm quite surprised to see on this and a recent ABR agenda where the height of proposed buildings is not mentioned, either in feet or in stories. And I think that's very, very important to project descriptions, especially in El Pueblo Viejo and near sensitive sites. There has been long-standing, and I would hope it would continue, requirement for streetscapes, neighborhood photographs to be presented or to be submitted along with a set of plans for the public to review and for this commission to review. It's one thing to have them quickly shown during a hearing, but it's also important to indicate for the public and for the commissioners the existing status of the streetscape. This, of course, is an extremely sensitive and important site. I've been involved with the Presidio project for about 50 years, and I remember the construction of the office building on this site in the 1960s and how we were wishing that we could know how close that actually was to the walls, but of course at that time there was not that type of environmental review done. The Historic Resources chapter of the general plan does set requirements and allows the opportunity for additional protection when there are projects within 250 feet of important sites. You've already seen the staff's presentation about the high number of designated buildings nearby. And that, of course, feeds right into the requirement for extra careful consideration. There are, as Mr. Imwali has mentioned, and I hope that he gets the opportunity to answer questions later, that there are the ruins of the outer defense wall. I really, personally, I believe that this project should not propose anything higher than two-story buildings. The elevation that you were shown recently looks almost 4 with the preponderance of little elevator housings or towers on top. I don't understand what the property owner meant when he said that there are no setback requirements for the commercial, but there's no proposed commercial. So there always has been setback requirements for residential buildings. So maybe something has changed where that requirement has gone away, which could indicate disadvantages to residential units. But I think I really believe that this project needs further study and further sensitivity shown to the neighborhood, to the topography, to the views, and to the historic resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin McCary, followed by Ann Peterson.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Kevin McGarry, and I'm the Associate Director for Public Engagement at the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation. But I'm here today to read a letter that was written by Dr. Dylan Miner, who's the current head of school at Anacapa School. And he will be submitting this. I just wanted to be here for him to put it on public record. He writes, "First of all, I apologize for not appearing in person. We have a large Halloween carnival this afternoon at our school that we've been planning for some time. Anacapa School has been part of the fabric of downtown Santa Barbara since 1981. A centerpiece of our pedagogy is engaging with local government and businesses. Thus, it is part of our mission to remain downtown. However, after many years of a tranquil academic setting, there has begun what seems to be a massive push for development around our property. We just recently failed at preventing an adjacent property from approval for development. This approved project, which was passed without majority support, will create significant adverse effects on our school and its children." I believe he's referring to 800 Santa Barbara Street. "Both the increased activity, noise, and debris during construction and increased density will result in distraction and potentially reduce safety for our children. And now a new project just near us is also seeking approval for development. This new proposed project will only compound our challenges of poor learning conditions and reduce safety for our children. I hope this commission can this time choose to protect our local school and children. Indeed, Anacapa had a short period of nearly shutting down due to financial challenges some 18 months ago. Happily, we have since grown enrollment by 50% and are on the road to recovery. I petition the Commission to prevent further near development that could knock us and our children from our return to a fruitful downtown school. Sincerely, Dylan Miner."
Thank you. Ann Peterson, followed by Michael Imwali.
Thank you, Commissioners, for the opportunity to address you. My name is Ann Peterson. I'm the Executive Director of the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation. I'm just going to briefly summarize a letter that I submitted on behalf of the Trust this morning. The trust is concerned about and is going to continue to monitor the potential impacts of this project on both the archaeological resources on the site and the size, bulk, and scale of the proposed project. As you know, foundations of the Presidio's outer defense wall are partially exposed above ground on this property. We are concerned that the distance between the resource and the proposed development is not adequate to provide a respectful buffer. We haven't given an exact a number of feet that we'd like to see the proposed development moved away from the resource, but we firmly believe that 10 feet is not enough, and we count on the expertise of the commissioners to help propose an adequate and respectful buffer. The trust would like to see the development proposed for the site moved as far away from the resource as possible. As my colleague Mike Mwali has noted, the existing structure on the site was intentionally sited as far away from those archaeological resources. We're also concerned about the potential impact on views from El Presidio de Santa Barbara State Historic Parks property along 800 block of Santa Barbara Street, as well as from the present parking lot adjacent to the project site on the corner of Canna Perdido and Santa Barbara Street behind Panino. We saw some view shed studies today. We encourage the commission to require additional view shed analysis as part of the development project. According to the city's historic resources element, all development proposed within 200 feet of historic adobe structures, El Presidio de Santa Barbara State Historic Park, and areas inclusive of the original footprint of the Presidio and other city landmarks should be subject to measures for additional protection. Such protection may require adjustments in height, bulk, size, and setbacks. We request that the Commission rigorously enforce this protection for this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael and Wally?
I would like to make a comment about the proposed setbacks down at Unit 108. If you use a scale on the plans that are in front of you, you will see that it is currently only 8 feet off the property line. That does not include the 5-foot walkway, which makes it only 3 feet off the property line. At that point, the foundation extends 2 feet onto the property. That leaves a 1-foot buffer between the proposed walkway and the existing foundations.
Thank you. I also have a letter from Jeremy Bassan.
That's me.
That's you.
Yeah, I read it.
You want me to read it again? Oh, that's you. You don't get, well, you get to talk again. Are there any others in the public wishing to speak? I'll close public comment.
Mayor LaVoy? I'm sorry, Ms. Riddle.
A letter from Ann Peterson in your red folder.
Ann Peterson spoke.
And summarize the letter.
And summarized the letter, I believe. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'll close public comment to the commission for questions. This is a concept review. So we need to sort of focus on the big picture items. And I'd like you to consider the project compatibility analysis in both your questions and comments, and try not to get bogged down in details quite this early in the project. So, questions, please. Mr. Grumbine.
Yes. So, first question was to do with the existing commercial property, in which I believe you have drawings of in here. Yep, A100. Yes. So I just wanted to understand what its current height is, and understand how that relates to the site a little bit, because I know because there's topography, how do things drop off, and you can talk about that.
Yeah, thank you. Let me switch to that sketch.
Here it is.
Yeah. So here you have a sense, here's the existing building. And I'm estimating this is all roughly at about 50 finished floor. You know, once we move on, we may fine tune, but about 50 finished floor. So you get a sense that we are really pretty much on in parity with the main roof forms.
And that roof form, if you wouldn't, so this peak here, because this is the gate, is this the side of a gable?
That's the side of the gable, and that is, let me get my photos. You can see it here.
Okay, that peak is showing you. Okay, so, and then this eave is that eave right there. So, okay.
And then you see here.
And then that slopes
This
it that way.
piece is here, and then that piece is here.
All right. That was my first question. My second question is if we can go to the site plan. All right. So, have you considered or have you looked at designs that flip this in any way, shape, or form that build to this side as opposed to this side?
You mean the entryway or the structure?
The whole structure. Seeing the elevations, this is a 3-story elevation, basically 3-story massing. This is a 2-story.
Understood.
Have you looked at that, and if so, what have you found? What have been issues that you're why this here and that there in terms of design?
Understand. What a lot of it came from was this idea that I honestly fell in love with, of this paseo, this experience of walking through this, and the idea of these bracketing elements that I thought helped the project as a whole read well together. Is it possible that we could flip it? It is possible we could flip those elements, but I think there's an experience that I liked about this that I thought was worth exploring before we did any other moves.
Okay. Thank you. And then one last question, even though it's not officially in our purview, I can still ask about numbers for the parking. For the ADU, are you officially overparked compared to ADUs? Or are you right on the money for what you're, AUDs?
Yes.
Darn it, every time.
I think we're all allowed to do that. We are parked right on the money.
Okay, thanks.
To use your term. And then we have adequate parking for the office space as well. But then there is definitely opportunity in the evening when the office space is not used for not only use of the on-grade parking, but possible dual use of the stackers.
Okay, great. That answers all my questions.
Mr. House, questions?
No.
About lights or something? About LEDs.
Commissioner Arias, questions?
On page A100, we have the floor plans. And I would appreciate, in general, if we got floor plans that didn't take a magnifying glass to read. I'm sitting here trying to figure, because I wanted to look at the units and to see as to their livability with windows and open space and things like that. And I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Pardon me, I didn't mean to interrupt you. These were the existing building. I'm sorry for the confusion.
Commercial building.
Yes,
This
that
one?
It's a commercial building.
put there for reference.
I thought this was a floor plan for this building, I'm sorry.
No. That's the commercial
So we
building.
have no floor plan for this building?
Yes,
then?
we do. It's the last page.
Last page. That's just the problem with getting 12 or 6 pages handed to you in the beginning. It would help if you had them in advance. So I would like to make sure that each one of these units has a livability quality.
I agree.
We have had projects that have put a door and one window, and that was the total light into the unit underneath the stairs. So people will live in this. And the other thing is that you have to assume there may be children. They do happen.
I've heard that.
Yeah, I found it out personally, yes. And people cannot always afford to move. So there has to be a certain amount of flexibility built into any design that can accommodate changes. That's my sort of a comment and all. I'm sorry, I sat here and I looked at this and looked at this and I couldn't figure out, it was in such small writing. Next time I'm bringing a magnifying glass. But anyway, okay.
Commissioner Ben, your questions? I have a few. I'm going to start with a comment, though. This is an ingenious idea, and I hope we see more of it. There's huge swaths of Santa Barbara that are parking lots that could be converted to housing and should be converted to housing. And the city owns considerable amounts of it. I hope to encourage you in what you're doing.
Thank you.
As I understand it, so in questions, you're abandoning this driveway.
Let me explain. This is a driveway that is, you'll see here the heavy black line is the actual property line. This is an easement that wraps all the way through here.
Okay.
So this is an easement to the benefit of the surrounding properties, and this part here is obviously only to the benefit of this project. But that is where you're seeing back here, that alley. Yeah.
Oh, so it's not really used.
Yeah, if I could add a little, it's
Yeah.
really confusing, quite frankly. And we had considered being able to keep this, but it gets really narrow around here. And this property one of these properties has actually encroached into the easement. And there is confusion as to who actually owns part of the easement. It might be the city. They might have collected it in lieu of property taxes in the past. The reality is, nobody really knows. Nobody really knows. It's not really usable. There's currently a chain up over here, and people park. It's not really usable.
So this is not a part of your project?
No, this is owned by Kathy Duncan. She owns this property, and this is her parking.
Okay.
We had some photos of that, if that helps to explain.
No, that clarifies the question. The next question. Okay, then there would be comments. Any other questions? Comments? Mr. Grumbine.
All right. So I think that the most obvious challenge is the Presidio wall. And it isn't, and just as a kind of general overview, I mean, it wouldn't so much matter if it came right to and stopped or turned or wasn't on your property. It really is the adjacency to it and the fact that it's such an important part of the city and nationally. And so I think that design-wise, it really needs to try an absolute every way, shape, and form to get as far from it, to give it the most breathing room possible. And that's where I started to, my question was a little bit leading in that. I think you can get I think you can get a Paseo feel to still work. I really appreciate you're looking for a Paseo because I think that that's also key to opening the blocks, even if it's more of a private Paseo, because it's only these people going to it. It's still, looking from the street, it'll still feel like Santa Barbara, even though you're changing elevation here. So I really appreciate that, and I would very much encourage you to keep trying to get that Paseo to work. Paseos can be between buildings, of course. They can be between walls. They can be between all sorts of things. So, but if you can, in every way, shape, and form, shift this over to here and shift your massing here, I think it'll be much more successful. In general, I think a 3-story is pushing it. Luckily, you're next to a very big building, or a building that at least is not going to get totally dwarfed. So I think it has a chance in that realm. For that to start to be comfortable, I would say that it would be very important to prove it in the 3D level. I think that you need to really have a 3D massing of the whole area, and not just the block, but the surrounding as well. I think that'll help us to understand what the relationship across the street, and then as well the other buildings around. And so I think that's going to be really critical to kind of get sign off. I think this piece is currently the most successful. I think that the relationship that you have going here, back and forth across the street, seems to be working. But of course, I need to see it in 3D. But this one, I think, is stacking it close to here is, I think, not the right move. I think you need to try to get it further away and use the fact that you're going to still have vehicular circulation around to use that to your advantage, so that creates a space, or in some way you create that space. So that would be my comment on the sort of the mass bulk scale side of things. And one other thing is the views of the mountains. I think in a certain way, I mean, you're taking a view from the already partly private, so sticking to the view from the sidewalk and seeing what those real impacts are, that's going to be the main key thing. If this goes in this direction, I think that'll only help you, because then you're hugging towards this building. So that would be, that would be my comments.
Commissioner House, comments?
Well, first of all, I would echo all the comments of Commissioner Grumbine. When we got the agenda and the project description said it was townhouse style and there were units stacked above the garage, I thought, oh, maybe it's only 2 stories. That would be nice. So I would have to say I'm disappointed with what I see in is this building B, is that what you call it? Mm-hmm. It's 3 stories, and with those stair towers, becomes nearly a 4-story building. The existing building has a very nice layered effect where it rises from a lower level to a higher level, so it really mitigates the 3-story main mass of that building. Whereas this building is just a solid 3 stories with a pretty minimal amount of articulation on the facade that's visible to the public. And we have experience with roof decks that, though they're a wonderful space to be on, they do have the added height of a stair tower, and in addition, all the other things that will gather umbrellas, et cetera, et cetera. So it really even raises the building height more. So, I know this is a challenge for you as a developer, for the architects, and it's a challenge for me as well, because I recognize the need for housing, and this is a great site to do it, and I very much appreciate Chair Lavoie's comment about parking lots could get repurposed and better utilized. But at the same time, considering the adjacency to the historical resource and the change to the views, I mean, the illustrations you showed kind of block out what's left of Mountain View from the street. So it is a public view that is affected. So I'm really struggling with a 3-story building in that location. And I think if you can come up with another solution of moving it or do some other arrangement, that might be more acceptable. But I would have a hard time supporting it as it's presented right now.
Commissioner Reyes?
Thank you. One of my top priorities would be the preservation and protection of the Presidio on the wall. And I don't think that 10 feet is sufficient, and it needs to be protected. This is a major asset in our community, and we need to make every effort to do it. We obviously need a landscape plan that is very sensitive to the type of construction and building that is here. I agree with Commissioner House that the 4th floor stair, what is it called? Stair towers don't work. They make the building just too big. I would much prefer to see a 2-story building. I think we need to have poles so that the public knows this is a very important site to the residents of our city. We need to have poles. We need to have a 3D rendition. And we need to also know how, in respect to our commissioner down there that's absent, the rooftop equipment are handled. And in general, I would have trouble going with such intensity on this site, and I don't think it's in the best interest of protecting the Presidio, which is a very, very, very important part of our historic history and, frankly, a major tourist attraction to the city.
Thank you. Commissioner Vena?
Well, I can't really expound too much more than has been said. I too concur with as to the height and possibly overbuilding on that area adjacent there or adjacent to the wall. My interpretation of a paseo is a little bit different than this one, in the sense that it looks like a sidewalk just going from here to there and coming around the.
You're not on, or you're check where your mic is. We can't hear you.
Sorry.
I think it's your mic is too much under your collar there.
Try it again.
There it is. Put it on your zipper.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, starting again. I concur with my colleagues. I think the building is too close to the wall. My approach to a paseo is totally different than your interpretation of a paseo. And as such,
One of these days, they're going to actually give us real microphones.
That are sound activated?
Yeah.
You know how much trouble we'll get into. I'm still suffering when they introduced televisions and microphones.
managed to get wired with everything here. Anyway, once again, the elevation, I think it's over designed, especially the areas adjacent to the wall. I concur with my colleagues. Once again, my interpretation of paseo does not look like a sidewalk. It's just too adjacent to the buildings than the potential area where the wall presently goes. The top staircases kind of look like pigeon coops at the top, and they just don't complement the facility at all, even if it has some wonderful aspects to it. I think it needs to be rethought completely. I don't think I can add any more to it, except I'm glad I have the mic on now.
Thank you. I'd like to start again with, this is an ingenious plan, and I wish to encourage you. It's an ingenious use of an infill area. The building, the big building, my guess is in Edwards and Pittman.
Don Sharp.
Don Sharp. Where is Don Sharp when I need to badger him? Is unfortunately scaled, and I don't think we'd allow it today. So to cover this building with a better scaled addition is probably a good thing. And I would encourage you to keep this scale, and as you develop the architecture, to look at El Paseo, the simplicity of El Paseo, rather than some of the more recent cluttered, overblown, disguised, in and out, sausage and too tight a casing architecture that we've been seeing around here lately. Not that your firm has been guilty of that, but there's some others. And in part that gets driven by trying to squeeze too much on too little. And I don't think that's the case on this site. However, I think as imaginative as this design is, you need to sort of play with it some more. And you've heard from almost all of us that we're very concerned about this corner and the proximity of a pile of rocks. That's what they are. They're a pile of rocks. So is the mission most of the missions at one point. So if you pulled the building away from here, And maybe put the building on top of here. The view of this building is worth screening, and then create that sense of mirroring like you're talking about here to there. I was hoping we could put this parking over here, but that doesn't belong to you, so.
Don't tell them.
Be very creative. I think this is a good idea. And it's maybe this portion of the building that needs to move in some way away from here. I think it's critical, and you have addressed it, that the street elevation have a two-story element with the third-story setback. I think 3 stories may work with some fourth-story small elements popping up. Might work. I seem to be in the minority. There's some reservation about 3-story buildings because they've gotten too big. I'm not sure that's your problem. But be very careful how these buildings articulate themselves, and be rustic and interesting and village-like, rather than apartment building-like. The shape of the paving and the needs to be more natural, more done by. With curves rather than with straight lines, would give it a take off that hard civil engineer, I don't do curves approach to design, and make that paseo just more interesting as it perhaps meanders around a tree or something when it can. We have gotten in trouble before by not asking for historic resource reports that accurately assessed the impacts to adjacent historic resources. And we have a very important one here, as well as a cultural resource study. And I'd rather have that information early on than have it brought up in an appeal later on when you've already spent considerable amounts of money on architecture and design and bought into a project yourself. But I'd encourage you to take this as a first step, a good first step, a strong first step, and pursue this idea. Because I think it would serve as a great example to Santa Barbara as how we solve this housing crisis. To summarize the comments?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Vania.
Wouldn't it be nice if they could partially build part of the bastion as part of the construction to whatever height it might be?
No.
No?
That's contrary to Secretary of the Interior standards.
Either build the whole thing or nothing at all.
No. You can't. Actually, the bastion wasn't. There's no physical evidence that the bastion was built. It was on a drawing. It was a wish list from Gobechev. It was never. There's no evidence that it was built. And they can't find any evidence that it was even started. So we don't know that it ever existed.
I see.
However, the foundation wall,
Outer defense wall.
the outer defense wall, was there. That was there.
Well, maybe part of it.
Maybe part of it. And that would be working with the trust to.
And that might be part of the paseo and have a plaque on it.
That could be part of the site wall.
Anyway, just a thought.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But that has to also be very carefully done and identifying it as not being an actual artifact. And that's something the trust does. So, to summarize the comments, we applaud the concept of the project, both as an innovative way of adding more housing to an under or misutilized section of the city. We find, in general terms, that the density appears to be appropriate, that the architectural style appears to be appropriate, that there are some reservations about the size, bulk, and scale as currently presented. There are some very serious concerns about both visual and adjacency impact to the Presidio ruins, and concerns about impacts to adjacent historic resources. And we would be requesting probably an historic structures report or historic resources report in the form of a cultural landscape report, evaluating both the adjacent resources and if it could, I guess, potential impacts to the project and to the adjacent resources as currently designed.
The 3D model.
Also that the applicant should anticipate that we would be requesting 3D modeling of the site and adjacent structures. And eventually, once the project is more solidified, to ask for story polls, probably before this goes to Planning Commission.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Reyes.
I made a comment about the livability of the units and that there be some flexibility as populations change. Our city attorney's about to say I'm probably out of line to say that.
I wouldn't say that you're out of line to say it, but it's not something that's within the purview of the board, so you can't require it of the applicant.
But it is future on how this will be maintained and lived and will affect the surrounding neighborhoods. So I respectively disagree with you. I think livability is something we have to deal with. Otherwise, I would say that I do not support that kind of high density. I would see it reduced.
Please add that as Commissioner Reyes' comment and not in the summary. But add to the summary as the design develops to enhance the viability and livability of the design and the project on the site.
Thank you.
Anything else? This is comments only?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So indefinite continuance?
Please.
Could I have a motion for indefinite
So moved.
continuance of those comments? House?
Oh, second.
Grunbein? Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That's it.
We are adjourned.
Record.